Greetings everyone, Brad here with Mild-Mannered EDC. And today we're going to do a classic mild-mannered review of the Spyderco Manix 2. That's right, and this particular one is a sprint run, their most recent, in CPM Rex 45 steel. Very cool. It's also got this sort of burnt orange scales. Those seem to be a little polarizing for folks, but yeah, I've always been a big fan of the Manix 2. It's one of those knives that, I think, as Spydercos go, everybody sort of has their favorite model. I do think there are those folks that tend to be PM2 folks, and then there's the Manix 2 folks. I know there are people that like both or don't like either, I guess. But it feels sometimes to me like if you're a PM2 person, you're a PM2 person, and if you're a Manix person, you're a Manix person. And that's just sort of for Spydercos in this sort of range, as far as size, price, etc., this is sort of, you kind of fall in one of those two categories. That's a little sweeping, but I don't know. I'd be curious to let me know what you think down below if you're kind of one or the other, or if you think I'm wrong altogether with that assessment. But yeah, I definitely, I think, fall into the Manix 2 camp a little bit. I really like the Manix 2. It's been a knife I've owned in a couple different iterations over the last several years. And certainly during more recent collecting era. So yeah, it's a really cool knife for a lot of reasons, and we'll talk about that today. So let's go ahead. So when we do a classic mild-mannered review, we talk blade, we talk action, we talk scales and hardware, and then we talk ergos and carry. And those are kind of the big categories here that'll help us get through the review. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the fun. And let's go ahead and start with some specs here. We always like to get those out of the way right at the beginning. So on this particular Manix 2, we have a blade length of 3.375. We've got a cutting edge here, because while the blade is longer, you see it's got this bit of a finger trail here. So the cutting edge is actually 2.95. So for a knife this big, it's interestingly compact as far as the actual cutting edge is concerned. We've got a blade thickness of 0.125, so there you go, and a handle length of 4.66, now when it's all closed up. That gives us an overall of 8 inches or so, or 8.3, or 8.03 rather, and a weight of 4.3 ounces, and this one's a little lighter than I think some of the Manix 2s from the past, and we'll talk a little bit about that in there as well. But yeah, so let's go ahead and do a couple size comparisons. Let's do the old mild-mannered Bestech Swordfish. So there you can see it's small, maybe kind of, it's there in swordfish range to some degree. We've got a rat number 1 here. There you go. You can see how that stacks up. And then how about a Benchmade bug out? Bug out a lot more compact, as you can see. And then how about a comparison with another Spyderco, and that being the Capara. There you go. So that's how they kind of line up like that. So with that, let's go ahead and get this classic review underway. And with that, we'll start with the blade. So the blade on the Manix 2, and this particular, and you can get them in a variety of different steels. This particular sprint run steel is in that CPM Rex 45, which is just a beast of a steel. Do I consider myself a steel nerd? Not really. I mean, I certainly find it fascinating. One of the things that has really turned me on to knife YouTube in particular was Pete over at Cedric and Ada. I mean, his steel, cut tests, and just his knowledge of steel and sort of the format in which he shares it. I've always really enjoyed that. And so I think I appreciate it on a sort of intellectual level. I don't know that it translates into me being obsessed with what steel I have in any given knife. I think it's fun to have a variety of different steels. That's something I do seem to like to do in my collections, but it's not something that I obsess over and go, oh gosh, I can't have that because it's got CPM 154, or it's got, or whatever. I mean, yeah. So, I didn't have a Rex 45 steel in my collection. I've always liked the Manix, and so this was one that kind of spoke to me, and I was like, yeah, I'd like to get that. I think that sounds like it'd be cool and fun. And like I said, Rex 45 is a bit of a beast when it comes to edge retention and just longevity and sort of the hardness that you can get out of this particular steel. So yeah, pretty cool. So anyway, so that's the steel on the blade here that we were talking about. As I mentioned, it is this traditional sort of leaf-shaped blade. It is a satin finish with a flat grind. And one of the things that I like most about the Manix blade, and it does have some jimping up here on the top, and it certainly has some jimping down here, and we'll talk about those when we get to ergos. But one of the things that I like most about this particular blade, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep I keep saying that, and then I don't tell you what I like most about it. But it does have this sort of traditional leaf shape, and I am a leaf shaped blade fan. So I think I have another one here. Yeah, the Spyderco Urban also shares that leaf shape design. So that's definitely speaks to me. Actually, I've been after a Sage. I need to get a Sage 5 lightweight, something I'm curious about. I've seen mixed reviews on it, but, again, I like that leaf shape. So, anyways, back to getting to the point of my favorite part of this blade, and that is the grind. It is just slicey as all get out. All Manixi, I don't know. That's one of their hallmarks, right? They are super, super slicey. And in fact, it gets a little bit of a knock as not being super hard use because it has such that fine tip that it comes to. And it really does. I mean, it's just wildly slicey. In fact, if you can see that, yeah, I cut myself earlier today. On this very knife while I was doing some things. That's not currently bleeding. At least I don't think it is. Yeah, we're all right. If you start to see blood marks all over the knife, you can feel free to turn off the video. But yeah, no. It's just so darn slicey, and I love that. And this particular grind to me, and I don't know what it is, it feels a little taller than perhaps some of their grinds may have been on the Manix in the past. And that could be total perception, and I could be completely wrong on that, but it just feels a little bit taller on the grind there. But yeah, no, it's a great slicer. Simple, nothing else to say about that. I mean, it starts way up here and gets really sharp. So, one of my favorite blades to use ever. And as you can see here, a little, traditional Spyderco markings, Golden Colorado, USA Earth. This is an Eric Glesser design, not a Sal Glesser. This is one of Eric's, which is cool. So yeah, there you go. That's the blade on this particular knife. Like I said, Rex 45, very cool. Something I wanted in my collection, and that's why you're seeing it here on this particular review. Hopefully we'll see how it sort of stands the test of time as things go on. But that's the blade. Let's move into action. Also, one of the things that really appeals to me about this knife, apart from the blade, is the action. And one of the things I like most about the action, it's obviously super conducive to the thumb flick, the Spidey flick, etc. Although I don't generally Spidey flick the Manix. Oh, there you go. It's just fine. But it also can do that with this unique ball bearing lock, and it's kind of hard to see, actually. Let me see if I can. For those of you that are unfamiliar with this, you can see the tang of the blade sort of moving inside. There you go. And then that's fine. And then as it comes around, you'll see the little opening. And then as this moves forward, there's a steel ball in there that clicks into place. Actually, it might be ceramic ball. You can kind of see it. I think it's steel, but it's a ball bearing. Very, very strong. Very strong lock. And then it uses these two tabs on either side, kind of pulled back together, and that's what releases the blade. Or, yeah, either way. Releases it open or releases it closed. It's a really neat locking mechanism. I actually like it a lot. On some levels, there's a little bit of an axis lock feel to it. Obviously, the action doesn't quite mimic that at all, but because as you pull this back, this particular one is not overly loose. But this is still fairly new, so I think it'll break in over time. My other Manix 2s have done that over time, so I expect the action to continue to get better and better. But it's a very smooth action. I have no complaints at all, and like I said, I find this very intuitive, as opposed to the compression lock, which, again, I really like the Capara. I've said before, it's one of my favorite things Spyderco makes. In fact, I think it's the best thing Spyderco makes, but the compression lock always to me feels a little awkward, even though it gives you a fabulous action. I mean, it's hard to argue with that, right? But yeah, I'm not as, I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on the axis lock, but I definitely do like this ball bearing lock, and I think it provides a great action, a fun action, very fidgetable, which any knife person will have to admit to you, if they're being honest, that fidget factor plays a role in their enjoyment of their knives. At least it does for me. So there you go on the action. I really enjoy the action. I could see it also. One of the other things to mention about the action on this particular knife with this lock is that it's completely ambidextrous, both because you open it with the Spyderco hole, and it doesn't matter which way you're holding it. If you're a righty or a lefty, this knife works perfectly well for either. So yeah, so that's another thing that's pretty cool about the Manix. All right, so let's move on to scales and hardware. So scales, these particular scales have that burnt orange, I think they're calling it, like we have talked about. This is it's funny. So when my first Manix that I got was a blurple. It was in that blue purple, and it was an S110V, which I actually not a huge fan of S110 anymore. I've kind of moved away from it. It's so hard to sharpen, and I'm not the greatest sharpener in the world.
That's an understatement.
And yeah, so I'm sure Rex is, whatever. I'm probably just completely talking whatever. But yeah, anyways, I initially got rid of that because I thought the G10 was too grippy. It was a little too heavy and just a little too grippy. And I was like, I don't know if I like carrying this around all the time. And so I sold it and got rid of it. And then I was like, oh, I missed that knife. So I bought it again. So I bought the exact same knife again and brought it back into my collection. And then I did the same thing where I was like, I'm not carrying as much. And the S110 got kind of frustrated me. And so I just was like, and sold it. And so I've not had a Manix until I replaced it with, or filled the collection back in with this one. I think this final go around, and I don't know, I could be wrong. It just feels a little smoother maybe than the previous Manix I, as I'll continue to struggle with that the whole video, as previous iterations of this knife. I could be completely wrong. That could be total just in my head, and it very well may be. But I don't know. It just feels, there's something about the scales. They feel really good to me. So yeah, I mean, they're just G10. Getting back to the actual point of this review, these are and not me rambling. These are just G10 scales. And, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think they look pretty good. Now, as it relates to hardware, as we talked about, you've got this ball bearing lock. You've got these two plastic tabs. That's been a gripe from people for a while, saying, why can't they make those, steel or whatever? Okay, I can see that. I've never had one in the 3 that I've owned, had an issue with them going out or breaking or anything like that, but it can happen, I imagine. So there you go. And you can buy kits to replace those, and that's fine too. The other thing that I really like about the Manix is everything is flush. They all have these flat pan head sort of screws, and the hardware all around, and they're all perfectly flush, which I think is awesome. There are quite a few screws, at least it feels that way to some degree, but I think a large part of that's holding to facilitate the ball bearing lock. But yeah, I don't have any gripe with that at all. There also is this peened lanyard hole, which I know other people have also complained about because it makes it harder to take this thing apart. And you don't really do that when you take it apart. You take the screws out and you sort of spread it open like a deck of cards, and it kind of slides open like that because the lanyard tube remains sort of intact. But, hey, if that bothers you, fine. If not, fine. It doesn't really bother me. I've tended not to take these apart all that often, but yeah, so hardware-wise, obviously you've got quite a bit of, ooh, look at that. I think I just tore that open again on the jimping. Gross. You've got, some jimping up here. You've got jimping down here. The Manix is pretty good as far as that goes. The other thing I want to mention real quickly about scales and hardware, and I can include the liners in that. You can see that my earlier iterations of this knife did not have milled out liners. They all do now. I think it's another example of Spyderco's sort of, they're quality, constant quality improvement, but they just never talk about it very much. You sort of have to learn about it as you go, or hear about it from reviews or whatever. So yeah, these are nice and milled out, which actually is a little bit of a reduction in weight, which is cool. But yeah, I mean, it just makes for an extremely sturdy knife. This is a knife that'll, probably last you as long as you'd ever need a knife to last you. So there you go. So that's my feeling on the handles and scales and the hardware. And I guess on the clip, kind of standard Spyderco spoon clip. Nothing really hyper interesting there. It's certainly not deep carry. Bugs me a little bit that it kind of crosses over this lanyard hole, and I could totally do without the lanyard hole probably and be just fine. I'm not a lanyard person, so again, that's kind of a Spyderco thing. It is what it is. I mean, they even put it on the Capara. I mean, they just put them everywhere all the time, and Spyderco's got a thing for holes, I guess. But yeah, I could do without it, but it's part of the knife. It's part of the design. Is what it is. Fine. Carry and ergonomics. So let's talk carry first. So this carry is pretty big in the pocket. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say it carries, amazing. When you compare this is another big knife. I mean, it's definitely you feel it in your pocket, especially this way, right? I mean, it's got some width to it. And I think that's where a lot of people, if you're more of a PM2 person, it feels maybe a little more, it's not as wide in that sense. Now, this isn't an overly wide knife as it stands this way, in this sort of version of the thickness, if you will, but definitely, this way, it's sort of, I don't know. So that's probably my least favorite attribute of the knife, is that it is so sort of wide in the pocket, and it's not overly deep carry, which is also kind of a bummer. But it is left or right tip up carry, which is great. So it's, again, very, very ambidextrous knife. Hard to argue with that on any front there. So that's kind of where I land on carry. It goes into the pocket just fine. I mean, again, it's a classic, is it going to chew your pockets up a little bit with the G10 the way it is? There you go. Sits like that. Yeah, I think it is probably. I mean, it's a little rough. It would have been cool if Spyderco did what they do on other knives, which is, put that little landing pad kind of underneath or a smoother spot there. But, I suppose you could sand that off, but I don't know. It just sort of is what it is. Now, ergonomics. This is another big win for me. So the blade I'm a big fan of the blade. I'm a big fan of the lock and the action. The ergos with this knife have always fit my particular hand really well. Super comfortable like this, just in a traditional hammer grip. Really, feels good if I want to put my thumb up here. And then that choking up ability, I love that. And one of the things I like a lot about being able to choke up, and one of the things that this particular knife does well, ergos wise, is you're really actually able to get this kind of, you want to do these draw cuts or some of these other things. We'll be at a restaurant sometimes, and I'll actually cut out the picture that my daughter drew on the paper placemat or whatever like that. And so I do like the ability to, just in general, or even if I'm just doing some precise cuts in the kitchen or, out on the boat or whatever. It's just, I think it works really well. It's not the blade, while, it is, you get this taller blade with the leaf shape, I get it, but it's not an overly huge blade on the Manix here, and I think that really is why it fits so well. When you're choked up or just in a regular grip, this knife feels really good, and that's not unusual on some levels. I feel like knives either feel, well, it's okay here, but it's really meant to be choked up on, or it doesn't feel great when you're choked up, but if you hold it regular, it's okay. This one really feels good in both, both ways, and that's pretty darn cool, I think. So there you go. So that's my take on the ergonomics there. So another really, really nice tried and true feature here of the Manix 2. So there you go. This is a USA made knife, $125, $130, somewhere in that range, and even for the sprint run. Although I think they're getting a little harder to find right now, so they're probably pushing, you'll find them with the prices pushed up a little bit probably. But by and large, I still think it's one of the best values for an American-made knife out there. I mean, you can get it in a nice steel. It's a knife that'll do just about anything you want it to do. And for made in the USA, $125, $130, yeah, that's really, I think, very, very compelling. And I don't think it gets enough credit for that, frankly. I think that's one of the best things about this knife is it's really still a pretty darn good value in a lineup of Spyderco knives where the prices continue to go up and up and up. So anyways, that's my take on that. So this is my overall take. That's the classic review here of the Spyderco Manix 2 in the CPM Rex 45 edition. I like this one a lot. I'll probably be keeping this one around until I find some reason to not want it, and then I'll get rid of it, and then I'll just buy another one. But no, I mean, it's one of those where I feel like, if you're looking for a really good ergonomic, slicey, American-made knife that's going to fit your hand beautifully and has an interesting lock and some good steels, can't go wrong with this bugger. So there you go. Thanks for sticking with me. Hope you've enjoyed this. I know this isn't a knife that's new, but this is a newer version, and it's a knife I really enjoy, so I wanted to share it with you all. So with that, be safe out there, be mild-mannered to one another, and all the best.